Great. All right, I'm going to begin. My name is Gail DeBryan. I'm chair of the Collaborative Design, Masters in Design. I love the Furniture People programs. It's my great pleasure to introduce an alum, Joel Van Kuyken, and his colleague, Cole Williams. They're with the Delta Project. I'm on the board of the Delta Project. They're doing really good work in our community on social justice with folks who are incarcerated. And they brought to the community a really remarkable woman whose name is Renée Cummings. She's going to share some really fascinating stories around AI and data injustice. Many of us have been reading a book called Just Mercy, and it inspires us to think bigger about the impact design has and art has in the world, and how we might move some of these injustices forward as practitioners, and what is our role in shifting the equities and inequities rather to a better place. So it's my pleasure to invite Joel and Cole forward to introduce Renée. So enjoy.
So Cole and I will share this microphone, and it's an honor for me to always share the microphone with Cole. And you know, I went through the Design and Innovation Management program back in 2016 and 2017, and that's when I really got to know Gail as I took her courses, and she guided me through that experience. But we were lucky enough to have Gail join the board of the Delta Project, which is a nonprofit that is focused on helping young men in the juvenile justice system become something they don't see. My partner in that work is Cole Williams. Cole is an amazing man with an amazing story that I said, just sharing the mic with him is an honor for me. So I'm going to let Cole talk a bit about the Delta Project.
So I think what's really amazing is that Joel and I, get an opportunity to see what we've been doing for a very long time manifest itself in this space today. So the Delta Project is really around this idea and this concept that young people within this community have an opportunity to become what they don't often get an opportunity to see for a variety of reasons, right? And so when we begin to unpack justice, social justice, inequality, part of the work that we've been doing is really entering into spaces that many of us in this community don't have any idea where the juvenile detention center even resides for the most part, right? And so at this detention center are young men and young women that are not at risk, but really are at full potential. And so we believe that the responsibility of community leaders, people in this space today, you all in this space today, have a really great responsibility in terms of making sure that as people enter and leave the detention center or are on probation, they have an opportunity to see what they can become. And so the work is really around shifting this narrative. It's really around impacting young people of color who oftentimes may not have the opportunities or the resources within their communities to be able to thrive and move forward, right? And many of our programs really coexist around how do we help them tell their stories, how do we make sure that when they tell their stories, people can hear those stories, but most importantly, how do we give them the tools and the resources so that they can become their own design thinkers, right? And so Joel and I stand before you, honored to be in this space, and really blessed to have the opportunity to have Renée Cummings in this space to really illustrate for you the impact of equity, the impact of storytelling, but most importantly, the impact of data, right? And so, we do a lot of work related to serving fathers. We do a lot of work for serving young people returning home, but most importantly, we do a lot of work in making sure that we invest in people and not things. So that is really the manifestation of what we've been doing with the Delta Project. And so I'm just honored again to be in this space with you, to finally see the work that we've been doing and to, come to life. So I'll pass the mic back over to Joel so we can stop talking and really, bring on the stage who we really want to hear from. So thank you.
So I just want to say how lucky we are to have Renée Cummings here. And it's been kind of a labor of love over the last 6 months, kind of pulling this together when we saw an opportunity to really create a discussion here in Grand Rapids about disrupting data injustice, which is really, this is the kickoff event for the week. We're privileged to be here, and I'm privileged to invite Renée Cummings to the stage.
Thank you so much, Joe and Cole, for that introduction. And let me say, it is indeed an honor and a pleasure and a privilege to be with you during your lunchtime, because I know lunchtime is definitely a very important time. So thank you for the privilege of your time. So I'm Renée Cummings, and I'm a criminologist and a criminal psychologist. I'm also a data ethicist, an AI ethicist, and a data activist. But my career did not begin with data science. I began my journey as a journalist, and then I worked in broadcasting for quite some time, and then I became a sportscaster, and I did that for a lot of time. And after that, I decided to go into government and public relations, and I did that, and then I worked in fashion, and I did some of that, and then I worked in music and entertainment, and I did a lot of that. And while I was doing that, I decided that I wanted to go back to school, and I worked as a substance abuse therapist in a therapeutic community in New York City for quite some time. And while I was doing that, I decided that there was something happening here where all of my clients with substance abuse and substance use challenges also had criminal histories. And I wanted to find out just a little more about the correlation between substance use and criminal justice. And then while I was doing that, 9/11 happened in New York, and I decided to do some terrorism studies. So I did a lot of that and a lot of forensics, and all of the things that I was doing, I realized there was one common thread for me, and that was justice. And one of the things that I am so committed to is this concept of designing legacies. Legacies are very important to me because what I want to see would be communities thriving, individuals thriving. And now we have a new challenge, and the challenge is data. And data is as powerful as it is vulnerable. It has the ability to transform just about every business model. Every discipline, every industry, every sector is being transformed by data positively. So data has this extraordinary positive impact. But then there is this ethical challenge because data is something that we cannot see, but it's being monetized, and unfortunately it's also being weaponized against us. So as we design futures and as we design legacies, we've got to think about this commodity called data. So I entered the University of Virginia as a data activist in residence, and while I was there, and where I am now, I became a data science professor of practice. So today we're going to look at this concept called critical data science, because I'm also a critical criminologist. Thank you very much. And we will speak about design justice and the ethical imagination. Three things that I'm very, very committed to. So critical data science. We've been all using data science. Data science is considered the career of the now and the career of the future. Critical data science says that we have got to challenge traditional understanding and thinking, and we have got to uncover the false beliefs of data. One is neutrality, that data is neutral. Science, mathematics, objective, a false assumption that we have got to challenge. The other is that using concepts such as data justice, design justice, social justice, racial justice, and algorithmic justice as lenses to scrutinize and to critique the ways in which we are thinking about data science. Now, design justice, and I decided to focus on design justice because I know I'm speaking to designers. And as you are designing futures. So sometimes when we think about design, and we think about data science as well, we think of individual things. We think of products. we think of policies, we think of processes, we think of systems. But when you bring it all together as a collective, what we are designing are futures, what we are designing are legacies. So data justice, and I put up this textbook by Sasha, and Sasha is a colleague of mine, that really looks at and drills into this concept of justice. And design justice says we've got to explore how design might be led by marginalized communities. So which means we've got to engage communities in the conversations about design. We've got to design with a community-centric thinking frame of mind to bring communities into the conversations. It's called engaged research, where you're not only speaking to the communities, but you're allowing communities to lead those conversations. So design is so critical. And if we are interested in designing systems that really change the dynamic when it comes to structural inequalities and really advances a liberation perspective and the ecological survival of all of us in a space, we have got to design with a justice frame of mind, which means we've got to combine concepts such as design, power, the power of the designer, because the designer holds an extraordinary amount of power in the designer's hands. So we've got to think about design, we've got to think about power, and we have always got to think about social justice as designers. So there's something called the matrix of design domination, which I find to be very powerful. And I'll just give you a quick story when design justice really impacted me. Of course, I'm working in the criminal justice system, I'm working in the prison system, I'm seeing how things are designed, how structures are designed, and how many of these systems and structures and infrastructures really re-victimize and re-traumatize and re-criminalize individuals. And it made me start to think. But I was reading an absolutely fascinating book by another colleague. Her name is Ruha Benjamin, Dr. Ruha Benjamin, and she has this extraordinary book called Race and Technology. And in that book, she was speaking about Kodak. And she was speaking about the fact that in the 50s and in the 60s, Kodak had to redesign its own business model. And it had to find a way to capture skin tones. And at that moment, you would think it was the 60s, it was probably civil rights, and Kodak had probably had its own Kodak moment and realized that, cameras are for black people too. But no, they redesigned their business model not to capture the variety of black and brown skins, but realized that the furniture that they were making, they were using a lot of dark woods and particular mahogany. And for them to get a better representation of mahogany furniture in newsprint, they had to change the lenses they were using to capture the diversity in the browns of the furniture. And that became a benefit for people of color, because now in those yearbook pictures, you did not find those stark contrasts between black and brown skin. So that's a perfect example of how we don't think, or we need to think more about design and justice. It's unfortunate that a big company like Kodak did not even think about designing or changing their business model with a justice frame of mind, but it's because of dark furniture that black skin started to be represented just a little more accurately in the ways in which we were representing in the media. So this design domination matrix simply says we cannot design with a universal perspective. Design is really not universal. We've got to think about the principles and the practices of design that exclude particular groups. And if we are to think about the concept of intersectionality introduced by Kimberly Crenshaw in the 90s, we've got to think about the different levels and layers of discrimination and victimization for particular vulnerable groups and communities. So what this matrix is saying, think about how we design with a whiteness frame of mind. Think about things like white supremacy, ableism, capitalism, and settler colonization, and how these are now part of our psyche, and how they inform things like implicit bias. and how we need to rethink the ways in which we have been designing. Here's another example, and it's an example from structural engineering, and it's an example from just engineering. Again, in the 60s, 50s, 40s, we're thinking about urban planning and how race shaped, in particular, New York City's roadways. And there's a very famous urban planner by the name of Robert Moses, and according to one of his biographers, he made sure that the bridges on the parkways connecting New York City to the beaches in Long Island were low enough to keep city buses out. And who was coming in on those city buses if they needed to get to the beach? Underserved communities, vulnerable communities, minorities, black and brown people, poor white people who were living in the cities. So he ensured when they were designing, they made it so low that those buses could not come out of New York City to bring a more diverse group to share in those beaches, which likely would be carrying, of course, poor minorities, so they could not pass underneath to get into Long Island. So harm by design, and it's something that I want you to think about. And how do we measure the historic harms created by unethical design? And you know, sometimes in particular we hear unintended consequences of data and unintended consequences of design. And I always say for the communities impacted and affected, it never feels unintended. It never feels unintended. So ask yourself as designers, historically, what kind of pain has been inflicted on communities over the years? What about the trauma of design? And we've seen that trauma in particular in the criminal justice system, and something like solitary confinement, and the space in which we want to put individuals in, and how does that impact your mental health and your psyche? And think about intergenerational trauma of design when we think about many of our structures, our projects, and how these have impacted communities historically, their mental health, their well-being, their wellness, opportunities to thrive. Think about the impact of harm by design. So when we design, and from my perspective, a design justice perspective, a data science perspective, one of the things that I'm encouraging students to think more is how do we design to liberate as opposed to oppress? And it's something that you want to think about. And it brings us to artificial intelligence. And one of the things that we've been seeing with artificial intelligence, and I'll say to you, when it comes to artificial intelligence, the only definition of AI is that it is still undefined. There is no definition, really. But we do know it requires an extraordinary amount of data. We do know that we're designing these algorithms, and we also know these algorithms are undermining in real time agency and autonomy and self-determination, which are critical to the ways in which we are building our own identities. So at the University of Virginia, the project that got me in there as a data activist in residence is called the Digital Force Index. And what I have done, I have brought together some amazing graduates of our data science program, in particular 2 brilliant women, and we have been designing this Digital Force Index, which is a collation of all the surveillance technologies in the US, where you now have an opportunity, as soon as we go live and public with this tool, to check, put in your zip code, and check all the surveillance technologies that are being deployed against you and how these things are impacting your privacy. I don't want to make this a criminal justice conversation, but there are things like geofencing warrants and geolocation warrants, and the fact that you can be in a particular location with your smartphone and in real time become of interest to the police just because of your data. And there is no privacy, and there is no privacy protection, and the police could question you, and you can find yourself just in a lot of trouble. But we have seen how facial recognition technology, in particular, which is probably one of the #1 surveillance technologies, although it has been doing some positive things with our phones, we can, our identities, our finances, we feel as though we are more efficient in airport spaces as we move through. What we've seen is that black and brown men, and black and brown people in general, have been wrongfully arrested because of this technology, which has created an extraordinary amount of trauma and continuous trauma in communities. So when we think about AI and algorithms and surveillance tech, facial recognition, smart cities, and asking ourselves, who are these cities smart for? How are we designing these smart cities? How are we using the data? Are we using it to alienate, to exclude? Are we making it smart for the people who have money, the people who have access? Our cities are where many of our underserved communities live, and we're not designing smart cities for them. So who are we designing those smart cities for? Self-driving cars, where the image recognition tools do not recognize black and brown skin. And these cars, again, in real time being deployed on the street. And our digital prisons that we're now designing, where we're thinking of being more efficient and more effective, and thinking about service delivery excellence. But what we are really doing is just turning the prison into a digital space where we can track, trace, terrorize, and traumatize people in real time. So you've got to think about the ways in which you are designing. So we design to include, not to exclude. We design to empower, not to disempower. And this brings us back to intersectionality, which is so critical to data science and which is so critical to design justice. And as we design using data to design new systems and future systems, we've got to think about how that data is intersecting with social identities and systems and structures. And we have got to interrogate the power, the politics, and the privilege attached to data. Because that is what we are designing with data, new systems. And we are using data to design some people in and to design some people out. We are using data to break barriers, and we're also using data to erect barriers. So this is why intersectionality as a concept is so critical, because there are many people who are victims of what I call polyvictimization, which would mean various levels of victimization. You can be victimized for being a woman. You can be victimized for being a black woman. You can be victimized for being a black gay woman. So you have 3 levels of victimization in that space. And you can be victimized for being a black gay poor woman. So you see the levels of intersection when it comes to the ways in which we're being victimized. So intersectionality, a critical concept. Innovation. So we all love it. Innovation is absolutely fantastic. Innovation is transformative. Innovation is progressive. Innovation is about development. Innovation is about how this world is going to thrive. But innovation at the moment is being done in a very uneven way, in which it lifts up not communities, but lifts up the inequalities and inequities that are now being manifested because of data-driven technology. And there are 5 companies that own all the data in the world. And we can probably guess that. The G would be for Google, an A would be for Amazon, an F would be for Facebook, another A would be for Apple, and an M would be for, oh, brilliant. So those are the people who literally own us and own the rest of the world. And what we're seeing with these data-driven systems that are also being turned into algorithmic decision-making systems is that they have this extraordinary power. We've seen them deployed in the criminal justice system, and we've seen them continue to re-traumatize and re-victimize communities of color. Because we have these algorithms that are being used to make some critical criminal justice decisions, and what they are doing is creating what we call these zombie predictions, overestimating the risks of black and brown men, and really not drilling into what the real challenges would be, which would be we're trying to build new systems with old data. So what we're getting would be the replication of old systems. So we've got to think about innovation, and we've got to think about how do we do innovation in a more inclusive way, for it to be ethical, for it to be responsible, for it to be trustworthy. We have got to do inclusive and ethical innovation. And ethics and innovation can exist in the same space at the same time. It can be done. And I also want you to think about inequity and the fact that all data are not created equally. And different communities experience data differently. And that is the reality in which we now exist. And inclusion is so critical to how we are doing data science, how we are doing design. Because with inclusion, we can recognize and we can explore not only the need for diversity in the design space, not only the need for diversity in perspective, but an understanding of the diversity of harms also being deployed, and an understanding of the cognitive injustices. I speak a lot about data's memory, and the fact that data, once we continue to share and continue to use historic data, has a memory of the trauma, of the pain, of the anxiety, of the frustrations of particular communities. When we think about redlining, which we're now doing digitally, when we think about the ways we're using data and algorithms to deny individuals loans and mortgages, and how we're using it in healthcare in ways that are not really focused on health justice and health equity, then we understand the kinds of challenges we are creating and why we need to have a very inclusive perspective to the ways in which we are doing data. And data science is about inferences. It's about making conclusions. And we have got to reimagine the word inference. We have got to do a radical reimagining of what we call a conclusion about a particular community using a particular kind of data. So it's just something that I want you to think about as you gather your own data as designers, as you gather your own data in ways in which you want to design futures. And we've got to interrogate. And that's one of the things that I encourage individuals and my students and myself to do. You've got to interrogate the data. You've got to interrogate that data, and you've got to destabilize what has historically been an appearance of neutrality when it comes to data. You know, the data says this. It's not us, it's the data that says we can do this. We've checked the data, and the data says that you are not qualified, or the data says that you are unworthy or credit unworthy. And the data decides who's worthy and who's not worthy and who is included and who is excluded, because we think it's science. It's data, it's math, it's statistics, it's neutral. Well, it's not, it's a false assumption. And we have got to always question the objectivity that we put into numbers, because numbers do lie, and we know that. So it's something that you always have got to think about. And the impacts. And what are the impacts of the things that we are doing with data? The ways in which we are designing with data. What are the impacts? What are the ideologies? Whose ideologies are these? What are the practices that we've been using? And why are we so comfortable using those practices as we move into the future, when we have seen that these practices have not worked for us as a society? And we've got to think about historical legacies. And when I started this conversation, I said it's my work in legacies that brought me here. Because in criminal justice, I was able to see how violence and homicide destroyed legacies and created situations of intergenerational trauma. And when you're denied a legacy, it means you're denied access. You're denied opportunities. You're denied resources to really create those dreams. And as we move more and more in a data-fied world, we are realizing that now we dream in data. Now we dream in algorithms. And these algorithms and the data are really being used to really defer some of our dreams. So we've got to think about future legacies, and we've got to think about future literacies, and we've got to think literacy, how we are designing for the future. And the most critical aspect of design is design integrity. And it's the same thing in data science, it's about integrity. And how are we to do that? Well, due diligence is critical. So as data scientists, we've got to think about what are those risks? How do we detect? How do we mitigate? How do we manage? How do we monitor these risks? And how do we use that feedback to reevaluate and redesign and improve and enhance our systems? And you've got to think about that duty of care as designers. It's critical. And it's a design ethic. It's an ethic of care that you have got to bring into that space. And you have got to think about autonomy and agency and self-determination, and whether or not we're taking people's rights away from them. Hence the reason we are so committed now to bringing a digital rights perspective to the things that we are doing. And the Biden administration recently released an AI Bill of Rights, a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, because we have realized the kinds of impacts in every industry. These algorithms are creating problems. And due process. Well, I come from the space of due process as a criminologist, but due process, again, is so critical to the ways in which data is being used. because due process is about justice, and it's about equity. And if an algorithm is deployed and you are using an algorithm and it has made a decision about you and you don't even know, you've got to ask yourself, what about justice? What about my rights? What about equity? Don't I deserve a fair shot at the future like everyone else? Or should my data tell a story about me? Or is my data my DNA? Or when I use my mother's last name, is it that her credit history is going to keep becoming and keep being my credit history? Why do they ask these things? You have got to start to think more about that. And ethical resilience, and that's something I try to encourage as a data scientist, a data science professor, as a data ethicist, an AI ethicist. I travel a lot, I speak a lot, and I try to work with companies, organizations, and governments to build that ethical resilience, which would be that understanding, what they call the Jedi principle, right? Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. How do we bring that into the space at all times? How do we think about justice? How do we think about equity and diversity and inclusion? And how do we think about vulnerable communities? And how do we think about representation in design, and voice, and visibility, and accessibility? These are all so critical. So we've got to build that ethical resilience, know that we've got to design with that due process, duty of care, due diligence. And it's about being ethically vigilant throughout the process. And that's what I try to do when I'm thinking about data science and thinking about how we're using data science and bringing that critical perspective to data science. It's indeed so important. And this brings us to the ethical imagination. And it's also what I call the interdisciplinary imagination. So when I started the conversation, I took you through my resume in real time. And I think it is that diversity in my own experiences that allows me to understand the importance of the ethical imagination. And I say my work as a data activist in residence and a data ethicist and AI ethicist is to stretch the imagination of data scientists and for them to understand why we need an interdisciplinary imagination. So you would find for AI and data science to thrive, we're realizing that we need all on board. We need our social workers, our criminologists, our psychologists, economists, our designers. We've got to come together and design collectively. It is so critical. So for us to do data science critically, and for us to design with that trauma-informed and justice-oriented frame of mind, we've got to demystify the data. Because a lot of communities are still in fear, and some of them rightfully so. When you think about the ways in which data has been used to harm certain communities and to be weaponized against certain communities. We've got to democratize. We've got to decolonize the ways in which we use data, because we're still using a very colonial framework when it comes to design. The colonial imagination, unfortunately, is still very alive in the ways in which we're designing. And we have got to think about ways in which we emancipate that data, where we emancipate our own design. It is so critical. And I put it in red because it's like supposed to be a stop sign. Techno Solutionism and techno determinism. It's that techno solutionism is that approach that every solution needs to have a technological, element. And it's not that. Technology is amazing. I'm part of it. I always say I wasn't there at the advent of the printing press, but I'm certainly here for AI, and I'm going to be involved in it. And techno-determinism means being deterministic in the ways in which we're using technology and believing that technology is the way forward in a very deterministic way. So yes, we are seeing AI and algorithms being used in a very explorative way, used in a very extractive way, in a very exploitive way, but also used in ways in which we can transform. And we can design great systems. We can do amazing things in healthcare with data and AI, and I'm really committed to using the technology in really instrumental and exciting and instructive ways. So I have my own ideas and things that I'm designing using virtual reality for the criminal justice space. So I'm a designer in that regard. But I just want to do it ethically, and I just want to make sure we do it in an equitable manner. So some things to think about would be multiculturalism in design and how critical that is. The indigenous imagination, also very critical, and you would find that our indigenous peoples, our first peoples across this globe, have been speaking a lot about data protection and data stewardship and questions such as data genocide and what's happening there. So just things to think about. And of course, Afrofuturism, which is also an area and a space that's getting a lot of attention now, and of course the Smithsonian is coming with a major exhibit next year that looks at Afrofuturism and what we have seen in Afrofuturism. Many of the things we're talking about now as scientific advancement already happened in Africa in many of those centuries that have been passed. So as we design futures, this is how we are supposed to think. And as I thank you for this little time in your lunch hour, I just want to say, as you're designing, just think about those legacies. Think about access, think about opportunity, think about voice and visibility and representation. And if we're designing these extraordinary futures, I think a great way to think about it is that we want communities to thrive. We want to have equity in the legacies that are being deployed. And if we bring that diverse, inclusive, justice-oriented, and trauma-informed approach, what we get is a better shot at the future. A future for all of us, and not just some of us. I thank you.
And we thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And I'm sure there's at least one question, probably brewing in a hand. I see a hand already. So we're gonna spend a few minutes doing a little Q&A. So I'm gonna wander back here. Can you pass this up to?
Hi, I just don't, wow, that's loud. I don't know what digital prison is. I just don't know what that term is.
So what we're doing is that we're using technology. So we're using algorithms, we're using digital technology to design our prisons now. So we're designing prisons just using what would be the latest in digital technology. And we're finding ways to track and to trace and to terrorize, saying that we're doing it more efficiently. So we're gonna put this electronic bracelet on your foot, we're gonna put it home, we're gonna monitor it, we're gonna look at the visuals, we're gonna collect the data wherever you go, and then we're gonna charge you for wearing this bracelet. And then when you can't pay, then you're gonna get back in the prison system because now it's a parole violation because we are not gonna pay for that bracelet that you're wearing. And just the ways in which we're thinking, of course, let's remove the walls, but just have facial recognition all over the prison. So, just ways in which we are doing things that we did historically with brick and mortar and cement and all of these things. We're saying, oh, let's do it more efficiently. But are we doing it more efficiently? As we continue to traumatize and to victimize and to just bring an extraordinary amount of stress. So we have something like facial recognition, but yet we deploy it against journalists and protesters. Okay, so that's what we're doing. We're just using this historic data and we're just continuing to, in some places, we're doing it really well. In some places, we're not doing it so well. But as a collective, we all need to be on top of it. We all need to be understanding what's happening. We've all created an extraordinary amount of data points, all of us, using technology. But we don't see that. We don't know what our digital twin looks like. We don't know what our data profile looks like. But there are companies that know that. They know what we like, what we dislike, when we like it, when we don't like it, who we don't like, and what they're gonna make us like. And that's the challenge. Why it's so critical to bring that ethical perspective. Why it's so critical to bring that understanding. And just don't take things at face value and say, well, it's the data. It's not the data. It's a political system. It's a very powerful system that's now being used to create various distinctions and levels of privilege. And I always say it because oftentimes we're all in the space and we're all designing and we're all excited about it. And you would find that even in the design community, many of us may be designing our own communities out of the future. And it's just something you want to think about.
Hello.
Oh, how are you?
I was wondering what your opinion on censorship is and how social media can control what information we end up seeing.
So, great question. When we think about data and democracy and decision making and of course disinformation and deep fakes. And when we're thinking about us really exploring our creative freedoms and having that freedom of expression, but also the thinking that there are communities that need that space to express themselves freely, but also thinking about the powerful entities and the bad actors who are now designing these algorithms to control what we are looking at or control the things that we may believe in and really channeling a particular amount of information to us. So there's this dichotomy when you think about AI personalization and using AI to do the things we don't want to do, right? And do those things more efficiently. So it's like you have this concierge service 24/7, personalization, booking your tickets. We're going to see more of that as we move into multimodal generative AI, and it's exciting. But I always say when we think of something like genocide, that's political personalization, where one group decides that they want only their group to be there. So it's a very powerful question, because at the moment we're looking at disinformation, but we're also looking at democracy, which requires an extraordinary amount of freedom when it comes to our views and ideas. But then we're seeing those freedoms affecting particular communities that may not have the same kind of access. But then what we think is freedom may not be freedom, because you have companies that are using a particular kind of information and sending it in your direction. So this is what they're doing. They're removing agency, and they're removing autonomy. And when you're removing that from the decision-making process, it means that we are not free, and we are not making decisions as freely as we think we're making. There's an extraordinary amount of research in that space, and a lot of investment when it comes to funding, trying to look at disinformation, deepfakes, and as we move forward, what is really going to be truth?
I'm looking for hands, but while I'm looking for hands, I have a favorite question I tell my students, always ask, what are you reading that's capturing your imagination right now?
The question is, what am I not reading?
Well,
So there's so much to read. I mean, the articles are just a lot. I have been reading, so many books. Data cartels, data and democracy. But I think the important thing is I'm going to tell you some books that are going to excite you.
okay, that would be
which is
great.
good.
What will excite me?
Right,
What should I put on my Christmas list?
Your Christmas list, if you don't have it there already, would be Kathy O'Neill, and she's also a fellow and scholar at the University of Virginia. And on Friday we were there in a symposium and her book is excellent. It's called Weapon of Math Destruction, and it's a book that you have got to read, because she is a financial analyst, she's a math PhD, and she breaks it down in real time. It's an excellent book, Weapons of Math Destruction. I would also say read Algorithms of Oppression by Dr. Sophia Noble. Looks at ways in which the internet has been controlling our thinking when we do those searches. Race and Technology, Ruha Benjamin, fantastic. Artificial Unintelligence, Meredith Broussard, also a really excellent book. Those are just some great ones out there. Data and Democracy is a new one. Data Cartels, fantastic. And Data, Privacy, and Love, I can't remember the name, but it's Danielle Citron. She's a lawyer, and she's also at the University of Virginia. That book is now groundbreaking, the ways in which data has affected privacy and affected the ways in which we love. So
Beautiful. And then my other favorite question is, who is the fine artist that captures your attention in this space?
the fine artist that captures my attention. I can't say that, but I can tell you what a brilliant artist that I know by the name of Miles Regis, and he does an extraordinary a breadth of work that I like, and it captures my own tradition and culture. I was born in Trinidad and Tobago, and he's also from Trinidad, and he's a Trinidadian artist I would like you to follow.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I'm looking for hands. Anybody? Wait, oh, come in. Someone's helping me.
So as we move forward with data analytics and getting more into the future, do you feel like we're going to lose more individualism and character in our design as far as the power it has, like meeting people's expectations and things like that?
It's a fabulous question. The ways in which it could definitely happen when we think about generative AI and what's happening in art at the moment with AI and proprietary rights and intellectual property, and who is the real artist, the AI, the artist, and questions around creativity. But then we are seeing not only creating the kinds of conflict, but it's also making so many people more creative at the same time. So these are new questions, and it's important that we ask them, and it's important that we have conversations around them, and we use them to create the requisite levels of intellectual confrontation required for us to do it better, for us to do data better, because it's so new. It is so new. So the questions are there. I don't have all the answers, but the fact that I'm in the space is because I want to have those conversations, and I want to be part of the answer.
Dr. Cummings, thank you.
It's not doctor, it's just Renee.
Renee, thank you for being
Sure.
here. So here at KCAT, we're artists and designers, and I think so often as educators and as students, our students are thinking about what is happening in the world of art and in design, and what are the trends, and what are the things that everybody's doing. And a lot of what you're talking about is quantifying, taking large amounts of data and quantifying what everybody's doing and seeing where that points. What advice do you have for young artists and designers who want to be disruptors, who want to do something different, who want to go against maybe what that they're hearing in the classroom about the trend is to go this way? How would you encourage them to be empowered to do something different, to be a disruptor?
Sure, and it really is.
And a brief introduction. This is our dean, academic dean Helco. Thank
Nice
you
to
for
meet
coming.
you, Dean. I will say, and it's not even original, just follow your heart. That's what got me this far. Follow your heart, and it always comes back to the things that impact us and the experiences we've had in our own lives and the things that made us question our own identities and the things that we continue to see that sometimes don't make us too happy and the kinds of experiences that we have, many of us, all of us, that have created difficult moments for us. You just got to go out there and do. You've got to go out there and do because we need it. We don't need any more of the same.
And I do enjoy that your journey was not a straight line and it was deeply curious. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so much.
I'm looking for more hands. Help me see more hands. Okay, great. Gabby.
It's okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'll just yell it. So looking at things like blockchain and Web 3.0, going back to the conversation about autonomy and agency in data ownership, what do you think the implications are for that kind of decentralized server model? And do you think it's going to restore some of that agency and autonomy over the way that we track and manage our data, or are we still going to see some of the same issues?
Can you try to repeat that just a little bit for the camera?
I think she was asking you because this mic still doesn't work. Were you asking me to repeat?
I just want to cause all kinds of problems today. So looking
Cause
at
problems, that's why we're
Okay.
here. Good problems, make good trouble.
so so back to just to repeat the question.
Sure.
Interested in blockchain, Web 3.0, decentralized servers. Do you think having that model might restore some of the agency and autonomy over data ownership, or are we still going to see some of the same issues?
I think we are still going to see some of the same issues, but it is going to bring a requisite amount of agency and autonomy, and we're seeing cooperatives coming together in that space as well to really, compete with the kinds of things that have already been in place. And as I said to you, this is all so new, so I don't even have all the answers, because it's happening in real time, but we've all got to get involved because we can only come up with the answers that work for us if we have this inclusive, diverse space of thinkers, designers, people who feel. If you feel something, that's just a start to realizing what that feeling is in real time in the ways in which you design and just including those communities in the ways in which you're thinking. And understanding always that communities are also producers and have an extraordinary amount of knowledge. And we've got to tap into that always.
So with that, I know it's time to go off to class, and let's do one final thank you and applause.
Thank you so much. Thank you.